Everyone. Bonjour, bonjour. C'est M. Blouin qui préside ça, imaginez. Je suis content, au contraire.
Bonjour, bonjour. Bienvenue au Théâtre national de la presse. On a avec nous aujourd'hui les ministres
Hello everyone, we have with us Minister Jean-Yves Duclos, François-Philippe Champagne, Bill Blair. We also have Major General Sylvain Ménard and Brigadier General Chris McKenna. I believe that we'll start with about 15 minutes of speeches to start. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Drouin. Hello everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to address you today, along with my colleagues, Ministers Blair and Champagne. Major General Sylvain Ménard and Brigadier General Chris McKenna of the Royal Canadian Air Force are also joining us. Canadians take great pride in their armed forces, and the Canadian government is committed to supporting those who serve our country so bravely by ensuring that they have the right equipment to do their jobs and to keep our country safe and secure. As part of Canada's defense policies, strong, secure, engaged, the Canadian Multi-Mission Aircraft Project was launched to replace the Royal Canadian Air Force's aging CP-140 Aurora fleet, which was originally procured 40 years ago. Following a thorough analysis and engagements with industry, the government has determined that the Boeing P-8A Poseidon meets all of the Royal Canadian Air Force's operational requirements and is the only currently available aircraft. Le gouvernement canadien a ainsi décidé d'acquérir jusqu'à...
The Canadian government has decided to acquire up to 16 P-8A Poseidon aircraft for the Royal Canadian Air Force. This acquisition will provide members of the Canadian Armed Forces with the equipment that they need to keep Canada safe. It will also help create good jobs in Canada's aerospace and defense sector. Minister Champagne will elaborate on these economic benefits in a moment. I'll now hand the floor over to Minister Blair, who will detail how the P-8A Poseidon meets the Royal Canadian Air Force's operational requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Duclos. I'd like to begin, if I may, by welcoming Lieutenant General Kenny, the commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and he is also accompanied today by 4 aviators of the Royal Canadian Air Force who have worked on the CP Aurora, and for whom I hope this announcement is very welcome news. I also am very pleased to be joined, as you know, by Major General Ménard and Brigadier General McKenna. And I'd also like to acknowledge the very hard work of one of our colleagues at Department of National Defense, Troy Crosby, who's done extraordinary work on this file. Thank you all for being here. Upon my appointment of the minister as Minister of National Defense, I've had the opportunity to work on an important file to 2 of my predecessors, and I wanted to acknowledge them for their hard work. Mr. Sajan, who launched our Strong, Secure, and Engaged Defense Policy in 2017, which committed the Canadian government and our Canadian Armed Forces to replacement of the CP-140 aircraft. Also want as well to acknowledge my immediate predecessor, Minister Anand, who did extraordinary work over the past 2 years to get us to today's milestone. Upon my appointment, the Prime Minister made it very clear that we have an obligation to provide the Canadian Armed Forces with the tools that they need to do their jobs and to keep us all safe. And that's why we're here this afternoon. Today, as Mr. Duclos has indicated, I'm very proud to announce that Canada is acquiring up to 16 Boeing P-8 Alpha Poseidon aircraft from the U.S. government for the Royal Canadian Air Force. As I'm sure General Kenny and our aviators can attest, today is truly a very good day for the Royal Canadian Air Force. The P-8 Alpha will replace Canada's current maritime patrol aircraft, the CP-140, which has been in service for more than 40 years. And here at home, the Aurora has done extraordinary service. It's helped us to detect illegal fishing, drug trafficking, and polluters along our coastlines, which happens to be the longest coastline in the world. It has hunted submarines. It's protected our Arctic sovereignty. It's conducted counter-narcotics operations. It's helped monitor the implementation of United Nations sanctions against North Korea. It has done its job well, and we're going to rely on it to continue to serve our country. But the Aurora is becoming increasingly difficult to support, expensive to sustain, and less suited to operating in today's threat environment. Originally procured in the early 1980s, the Aurora will have been in service for almost half a century when it reaches its scheduled retirement in 2030. And meanwhile, our adversaries have been deploying increasingly sophisticated, stealthy, and lethal capabilities. And therefore, the Aurora must be replaced. And that is why we are acquiring the Poseidon. The P-8 Alpha Poseidon is the only currently available proven aircraft that meets all of the operational requirements as defined by the Royal Canadian Air Force. And we believe that it is very much in the public and national interest to acquire the only capability currently available to us. The Poseidon specializes in anti-submarine and anti-surface warfare. It can identify, detect, and track and engage threats using sophisticated sensors and weapons while defending itself from potential threats. These aircrafts are not just planes. They are complex weapon systems. And the Poseidon is a proven capability with a track record of success. This platform is operated by all of our Five Eyes allies, and in addition, in use by several other security partners. This interoperability is key in today's global security environment. Crucially, this platform is the only currently available platform that meets our requirements. And since it is available, we anticipate that deliveries will begin in 2026, and we expect the final aircraft to arrive as soon as 2027. The new fleet of aircraft will be based at 14-wing Greenwood in Nova Scotia and 19-wing Comox in British Columbia. We will be making significant investments in new infrastructure right across Canada, including at these bases, and this project as a whole will support thousands of good jobs across Canada. As our world continues to evolve, this new fleet will be there to protect Canadians. It will help us enhance Arctic security and maintain national sovereignty over the Arctic. It will enable Canada to meet its NATO, NORAD, and other obligations. In 2024, the Royal Canadian Air Force is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary of extraordinary service to this nation and to the world. Our Air Force has an incredibly proud history. We have an obligation to ensure that it has a proud future. Our Air Force must have the tools that they need to do this essential job and the ability to attract the very best and the brightest to serve in its ranks. I believe today we've made a significant step forward in ensuring that future. Thank you very much. And I'll now turn to my colleague, Mr. Champagne.
Thank you. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci, Monsieur le ministre.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Minister Duclos and Mr. Blair.
Tel que mentionné par mes collègues,
As mentioned by my colleagues, we had to examine different factors in order to make a decision in Canadians' interests. One of those factors, as you can imagine, was the economic benefits. And so let me take a moment to explain these economic benefits from today's announcement. In Canada, we have good policies to protect our industry, and we want to protect small and medium-sized businesses. When we have a significant supply agreement, we examine that. We want to examine industrial and technological benefits, also called ITBs. This forces businesses who receive supply contracts in defense to carry out commercial activities in Canada, and it needs to be a value equivalent to the contracts that they receive. And so for each dollar given to a business for a supply contract, that same business must reinvest $1 in the Canadian economy. It's that simple.
It is essential that companies, in this case Boeing, contribute to Canadian jobs, Canadian innovation, and Canada's economic growth. Indeed, as part of today's announcement, Boeing is committing to reinvesting here in Canada an equivalent amount to the value of the contract that is being awarded. This agreement includes performance guarantees and requires Boeing to provide business activities in Canada over a 10-year period. Let me assure you that we'll be monitoring this very closely, as my officials will be reporting publicly on Boeing's performance in meeting its obligations on an annual basis. Now, here's a quick preview of what you can expect to see from Boeing here in Canada. And I can tell you we've been negotiating hard on behalf of Canadians. They will integrate Canadian companies in their global supply chains. They will develop clean technologies and support the development of skills and training across our nation. En effet, Boeing injectera des milliards d'investissements dans les
Boeing will be investing in companies here in Canada, and this will create good jobs, firstly, in companies such as CAE, GEC Aviation, AeroDevTech, and many others in the country. Secondly, it will bring innovation. And this is good news. We'll have a new innovation center in Montreal. Boeing will be opening that innovation center in Montreal. And they will also be investing in research centers and development centers elsewhere in Canada. And finally, they will continue to create partnerships with universities in the country. Thirdly, economic growth throughout the country. And they'll be working with hundreds of providers here on their different platforms. With all of these commitments, we are confident that the contract will benefit our workers and our aerospace industry throughout the country.
Today's announcement is good news for our military. And I think we should defer to them when it comes to national security and important decisions like the one today. It's also good news for national security. It's good news for our workers, and it's especially good news for many in the Canadian aerospace industry. With that, M. Blouin, ça nous fera plaisir de prendre vos questions.
Très bien, on va commencer dans la salle.
We can move to questions. We'll start in the room. Laura from Bloomberg.
Laura Dillon Kane, Bloomberg News. So my first question is just on the contract. So we've heard that Boeing will reinvest about Canadian $5.4 billion into the economy. So is that the amount of the contract, the money that's going to Boeing? And if so, what is the $5.9 billion US that Congress has approved? What's the disparity between those two figures?
So let me be very clear. My colleague, Minister Blair and Minister Duclos, may want to add to that. One is the project value. The other one is the contract value. In the project value, you have obviously the equipment and the sustainment, but you also have all sorts of investments that need to be made in infrastructure, in fuel, in training support. You need to prepare the bases that Minister Blair were talking about to put them up to grade in order to be able to operate this new aircraft. The $5.4 billion, which we're talking, for which Boeing need to invest an equivalent amount of money in Canada, that's what we call the industrial technological benefits, for which they need to invest in Canada. And that we expect will create, I would say, something around 3,000 jobs, and certainly and maintain 3,000 jobs, and that will go for 10 years. So $5.4 billion, 10 years, and that will support 3,000 jobs in Canada.
Another question for Defense Minister Blair. Could you speak to specifically the threat environment that has changed over the past year and a half or so that these aircraft will be poised to combat? And specifically, how might these aircraft have responded to interception in the South China Sea that the Auroras experienced?
Thank you for the question. I believe during the technical briefing, you received information about the experience of the Air Force in the South China Sea during an interception. And I think it did reveal to us some of the increased challenges that the Air Force is facing in this environment. There are many things that these planes do for us. One of the challenges we have is the current platform, the P-140, the Aurora, is that it has reached its limit, and in many cases is actually exceeding the weight tolerances for that plane, and that limits our ability to add additional new technologies and avionics for that plane, and I would defer, of course, to the generals that have joined me today to provide more information on that. But certainly within the threat environment, I think what has become quite clear since the invasion, for example, of Ukraine and a much more aggressive posture by Russia, in our discussions with our NATO partners, there is increased concern about a much more aggressive approach undertaken by our potential adversaries. We're also witnessing in not only in the Asia Pacific but in our own Arctic, the higher frequency of a persistent presence, which is more threatening and more lethal in our Arctic and in those areas for which we have responsibility. Our ability to work compatibly with our allies in addressing that threat. We've worked very closely with our NATO allies in the Indo-Pacific, with allies in that region, and of course in North America through NORAD and other mechanisms. We work very closely with our allies. Our ability to do our part in that is being increasingly challenged by the limitations of what was an aircraft, developed and it's given great service, but over the last 40 years. And the next generation of threat requires the next generation of response. And that's what brings us to a new definition. The Air Force provided us with 3 specific capabilities in response to that threat. They talked about anti-sub, anti-surface, and the use of optical cameras and electronic warfare sensors. All of those capabilities challenge the capability of the Aurora and lead us to the requirements that we've identified in the CMMA project.
Juliane Lapointe de Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour. Comment vous défendez
Radio-Canada. How do you explain not having a call for offers? Answer. My role is to apply to Canadian government clients. In this case, it is the Department of National Defense. They were very clear. They said that the only plane that could be used in order to replace the CP Aurora fleet that will be obsolete in 2030, well, the only one that existed and responded to their needs is the P-8. And so we examined the issue and we respected the expertise of national defense. And that was the only way to move forward in order to ensure the national security of the country. We know that Canada needs to operate in a concerning new geopolitical environment, and Canada needs to be able to defend its sovereignty, but also support other countries. And that is why we moved to today's announcement. And what do you believe that shows the international community if you're setting aside Bombardier and going to a different company? Does that not seem like you're giving up on a Canadian company? Perhaps Monsieur Champagne will be able to answer further, but whether it be Boeing or Bombardier or another company, the impacts will be felt throughout the country. Boeing already has over 550 suppliers in Canada, and they are working hard, and they will continue to work hard to ensure that this acquisition goes well. There are significant economic and technological benefits. Thousands of jobs will be created throughout the country, including in Quebec. And so even if the goal is to ensure the security of the country and ensuring that Canada can play its role abroad, there are still economic and technological benefits here. And we need to be cautious as well. I've been following this file since the beginning. The Canadian air industry includes hundreds of providers. We have the needs, the taxpayers and industry, and we looked as well at the availability of an aircraft. In this case, there is an aircraft in use that is available and currently in production. And on the other side, we had the concept. And the goal was laudable. And I know the product that Bombardier offers. We want to support Bombardier in the development of aircraft. They want to have the most green aircraft, and we want to support them. And we want to support them in going into the military industry. and we are looking at that with them. But for today's decision, well, the Canadian industry has different players. We have those that train pilots, those that look at runways. We have companies in Nova Scotia and in BC. And so we negotiated with Boeing to have an innovation center in Montreal, and that says a lot on the work that we've done to ensure that this investment will benefit the aerospace industry in Canada and Quebec. There are people in the industry who work with Boeing, some work with Bombardier. The ecosystem is quite wide in the country. And for every dollar invested in this contract, so $5.4 billion, Boeing will be investing $1. So $5.4 billion that will be coming to Canada to support the ecosystem and will be done over about 10 years and will have thousands of jobs. Today's choice, when we're talking about national security, I think everyone will understand all of the things that we needed to examine. We need to be cautious. Boeing will be investing equivalent sums in Canada. And this is good for the supply chain in Canada. And we will continue to work with Bombardier. We believe in their capacity and will continue to look at ways to work together with them for their devices here and abroad.
Thank you. I'd like to know, first of all, in regards to the threat level, if we could be a little more specific. This has anti-aircraft and anti-sub capabilities, weaponry on board the planes. What threats are we talking about to Canada's Arctic sovereignty, and from which countries?
I think certainly the CMMA operational requirements that we articulated, we said we needed an aircraft that was capable of providing responding to anti-submarine warfare, anti-service warfare, and what is sometimes referred to as C4-1SR, which deals with the use of cameras, electronic warfare, and other sensors to track targets. Those are the requirements that we defined, and it was, at the time, in acknowledgement of an increasing threat environment. There are countries who have demonstrated that they are adversarial to our national interest, and this really is a question of national security. We have responsibilities to NATO, for example, and living up to those responsibilities require that our Air Force has the capability to deliver on those requirements. We also have responsibility to maintain national sovereignty. We are seeing more frequent incursions and frankly, a more aggressive posture from some of our potential adversaries, and I would note in particular Russia and China among those. And so we believe that threat is there. The other thing, and I think this is if I may make the point, it's rather important, the Aurora's ability to defend itself against lethal adversarial action is somewhat limited. And so our aviators are in fact at risk at that. Their ability to project force, if and when it was required, is also somewhat limited on the same platform. And so when we defined the CMMA operational requirements, we talked about increasing defensive capabilities as well as the abilities to deliver on these important missions, but increasing defensive capabilities and lethality for those things, because that's the job that we've given them. It's an incredibly important job. It's significant. The decisions we've made, and if I may just sort of respond a little bit to the previous, when we defined those operational requirements, it's what the Air Force said they needed from us. We looked, and the only currently available aircraft that delivered on those capabilities was the Poseidon 8 Alpha. And the other choice, it wasn't a choice between this airplane and another, because there is no other available at the present time. The choice was to engage in a developmental option. And there are risks associated to developmental options. There's a high degree of uncertainty around cost, around schedule of delivery, and ultimately about operational effectiveness. the certainty of this platform, because it is in use among our allies, and the fact that it met all of the requirements that the Air Force defined for us, really made this not only the right choice, but frankly the only choice.
Since it is an issue of national security, and since Canada at this point was the only Five Eyes ally that did not have the Poseidon, along with the fact that several NATO countries also have the Poseidon, did Canada have a choice in actually not taking on the Boeing Poseidon? It would seem that this would be the logical choice, and it would be something that our allies would want us to do. Did you feel that pressure?
No, ma'am. The only pressure I feel as the Minister of National Defense is the pressure that we should feel in our responsibilities to defend our nation and our national interests, and to live up to our international obligations to work with our allies. And so we engaged in a very fulsome process that it began actually in 2017 with a review of the capabilities of the Aurora, and continued on over the past number of years to define the CMMA operational requirements. And a lot of work was done, as I mentioned earlier, by my predecessors and by the Air Force here at the table and presented here. We made a decision that was right for Canada. And we came to the conclusion that this was in Canada's national interest to make this decision and to acquire this capability.
Ashley Burke, CBC.
Minister Blair, you're sole sourcing this $10 billion deal. Is what you're announcing today a recognition that the government needs to move much faster when it comes to all kinds of military procurement?
Yes, ma'am. We've talked previously, and I've spoken previously about the need to continue to make significant investments, but I would also point out that decision was made by our government really in 2017 with the strong, secure, and engaged policy that was brought forward with significant dollars behind it. The dollars that we're now expending in this procurement was really brought forward in 2017, and it's been part of a national strategy to significantly improve Canadian Armed Forces capability at sea, in the air, and on land, but also cyber and in space. We recognize in that policy document, but we also have acknowledged as well that the threat environment continues to evolve, and we're going to be required to make additional investments and to do more in the future. But this is a pretty important step. This is an acknowledgement that a capability that has been available to Canada since 1980. It's reached the 40-year part of its life cycle, and even by the time we complete this procurement, the Aurora will have been in service for almost 50 years, which is a remarkable long time, and it's done yeoman service throughout that time. But the next generation is required, and we're going to make those investments. And I personally feel a sense of urgency to address the needs of our armed forces. We ask much of them. We've given them one of the most difficult jobs, and the world is becoming an increasingly dangerous place. And therefore, I'm very much seized with a sense of urgency to respond to the requirements that they brought forward. We're spending Canadian taxpayer dollars. We're going to do it carefully. We're going to do it thoughtfully. But we know that the job needs to be done.
Here, there have been calls to replace aging submarines. The commander of the Navy recently issued a video warning that the force is in a critical state, including because of ships that are beyond their life cycles. A report commissioned by DND recently concluded that Canada's fighter force is in a crisis. How dire is the situation when it comes to equipment right now and readiness? And could we see more projects sole sourced moving forward like this to speed it up?
I wouldn't define the situation as dire at all, but I would acknowledge that we are all seized with a sense of urgency. We have to continue to invest. We have to continue to move forward. We have a responsibility to keep the nation safe and to protect our national interests and to live up to our international obligations. We are absolutely committed to continue with that work and make sure that we do it right, and we do it in the right way. And that's much of what we're talking about here today. But with respect to the Navy, we've entered into a national shipbuilding strategy. We've already completed the construction of 4 new Arctic offshore vessels, and 2 more are under development. We've entered into a contract to replace our now aging Halifax-class ships with a new Canadian surface combatant ship. That work is well underway, and we budgeted for it, and we've begun that development. There's also other investments that are taking place. I'm sure you're aware that we made a decision with respect to the fighter plane, the F-35, that we're investing in, and we're going to be delivering that capability to the Canadian Air Force. Making sure we have the right equipment, the right platforms, the technology, and the weapons that they need to do their job is critically important. But the other thing, and I think the Admiral of the Navy has said this, and I'm sure General Kenny would share it with you as well, the other urgency is making sure that we bring in the very best and brightest of Canadians to join the Canadian Armed Forces, to serve in our Navy, to serve in our Air Force, to serve in our armed forces, to make sure that we have the people we need, because making sure they've got the right equipment is a big part of the job. Making sure we've got the right people to do that job is equally important, but those are not unrelated topics. Making sure that we provide people with the best possible equipment, and so that they can be proud to serve and effective in service.
And let me, if I may add, just, and maybe Minister Duclos will want to, this is also about, let's not lose sight that for every dollar of this contract, you were saying sole source, money's coming back in Canada. This is also about jobs. This is about helping our Canadian aerospace industry. This is about also building the supply chain in Canada. We know Canada is the third largest country in the world for the aerospace industry. So we know how to do things. And for me, I see in the modernization of a lot of the platform that Minister Blair has been talking, we've been engaging with Canadian industry. We've been engaging with partners to make sure, like I said, there's always the quadrant of the needs, the taxpayers, and obviously the industry. My job and the job of colleagues is to make sure that we maximize opportunities for Canada. And I can tell you today is about that, because yes, you have the acquisition cost, but you also have the in-service support. You're going to have all the supply chain that we want to build, and that is very resilient. The Aurora has been giving jobs for hundreds of Canadians for decades, and we want to make sure that skills, that knowledge, that expertise that we have in Canada, that's how we land these significant investments that you're going to see in Canada. Yesterday, we were there about Dow Chemical, to name just one. So the expertise we have built, we want to make sure that this is going to be the basis for everything that the national defense needs, that we can at the same time favor Canadian companies. And that's why in this case, the ITBs are going to favor Canadian companies. So yes, you may say that this is Boeing, but I would say this is very much about Canadian aerospace industry from coast to coast.
Il y a des ministres qui doivent voter, et apparemment c'est un vote.
There are ministers that have to vote, and it's a confidence vote, so you'll have to leave for a few moments, and we'll be able to continue. We need to win this vote in order to continue to your questions.
Vote remotely.
Give us a second.
And if it's a confidence vote, apparently. So they will go out and come back in a minute, and we'll go back to the... And we'll go back to the questions online. So if there's people online listening, just raise your virtual hand and we'll go to your questions when they come back. Alors, s'il y a des gens en ligne qui veulent poser une question.
If there are people online who would like to ask a question, just have your raised hand function on, and we'll come back to that when we come back.
Alors, on va être en mesure de reprendre.
We are going to resume. I will give the floor to Julien Arsenault from La Presse. You have the floor.
Bonjour, est-ce que c'est mon tour?
Oui, vas-y, Julien.
Toujours votre tour, M. Arsenault.
Écoutez, en 2016 ou en 2017, il y avait eu un contrat accordé.
The sound quality coming from the current speaker is not sufficient for interpretation to be provided. Interpretation will resume as soon as the quality allows it.
Si ma mémoire est bonne, l'objectif était d'amener la durée de vie de cet avion-là vers 2038 ou 2040. Aujourd'hui, on nous dit là, que les Poseidon vont être livrés à partir de 2026 jusqu'en 2027. Donc, pourquoi à ce moment-là, on a dépensé des centaines de millions de dollars pour prolonger la durée de vie des Aurora qui va visiblement être raccourcie là, vis-à-vis la stratégie d'il y a quelques années?
Je peux commencer en français.
I'll start by responding in French, and Minister Blair will be able to respond in English. The Aurora updates seek to have them be useful up until 2030, but after 2030, we've been told by National Defense that there won't be the capacity to offer the services that they are responsible for in Canada and abroad. But that said, I will give the floor to Minister Blair.
Thank you very much. When we first acquired the 140, the CP-140, the original life expectancy of that aircraft when we acquired it in 1982 was 2002. That was our expectation. In 2008, we based on some new structural life limited extensions, we extended that life to 2020. In 2015, as part of the business cycle analysis that took place at that time, the Canadian Armed Forces identified that the life expectancy of the CP-140 would be 2030. And since that date, there has been absolutely no change in its life expectancy defined. I've got the documents here in front of me, and the 2030 has been the expected life of the CP-140 since 2015.
Merci.
Un suivi, Julien?
Follow up?
We're going to go to Kenneth Paul from Frontline Magazine.
Good afternoon. Question for General Menard, I guess, since I didn't get a chance to ask it in the technical briefing. Has the RCF had any air crews or backseat guys flying with the Allies on the Poseidon yet? If not, when would training begin?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Paul. Right here with us, we do have an officer that flew on the P-8 on exchange, so we do have some expertise on flying on the platform. We intend on sending our first 2 crews in 2024, and then after that, the training will scale up to make sure that we're ready by the IOC initial operational capability in 2028 to be ready for that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Follow up?
Nope.
We'll go to Kevin Doherty.
Hello. Yes, Kevin Doherty from iPolitics. So the CP-140 was, I believe, 400 million was invested. New wings were put on, new equipment, and at the Guam competitions, the CP-140 beat the P-8. Now, is this, is it really that bad a plane?
I think in fairness, I'm going to turn to General Menard and General McKenna perhaps to answer that question, because I think they would be able to far more clearly articulate the limitations of the aircraft.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin, for the question. I would like to say that the Royal Canadian Air Force is extremely proud of its aviators. They are extremely well trained and second to none in the world. That said, it's becoming harder and harder for them to actually compensate for the aging sensors that we have on the CP-140. Now, if we look at the performance of our aviators in several competitions, they've done extremely well. But I think we need to contextualize the exercises and the competitions that they are in. So first of all, there's zero threat to the air platforms that are used, to the maritime patrol aircraft and the anti-submarine aircrafts that are used in there. So that's why the Aurora could do very well in this case. But if we were to add just a credible threat, what we see day in, day out in an operational theater today, and the risk that our aviators are facing, obviously the results would be very different. The second thing that I would like to mention is that these competitions are held over a very relatively small training range area, in which the CP-140, being slower, does very well with its current sonobuoys and everything. If we, in real life, when we actually are patrolling or tracking threats at sea, we have extremely large areas to cover, for which the CP-140 is rapidly becoming inadequate to do so efficiently. As well, in these exercises, it's important to stress that the objective of these exercises is to foster great cooperation between the alliance and our partners. And the threat that we are tracking is an artificially enhanced, way noisier submarine threat that is easier to actually track. To make the exercise viable and to come up to a resolution relatively rapidly. If we were to use some of the latest threats out there, obviously the results would differ. So that's why our greatly trained aviators, who we're very proud of, do very well. But in real life, it is a different story, and we need to mitigate today the operational employment of the CP-140 due to its limitation. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I have another question. Bombardier says that, of course, the aircraft doesn't exist at this point, but they say that the Global 6500 with the General Dynamics hardware would be a superior aircraft. And at this point, the Canadian Commercial Corporation has an MOU with Bombardier to sell this aircraft. Would the fact that Canada is not buying this aircraft be a problem for Bombardier in selling it to other countries?
Kevin, if I just may answer that, your earlier point is correct. There is no aircraft currently, and so we are talking about either choosing the only currently available aircraft that meets all of our operational requirements, or pursuing a developmental option. And as I indicated earlier, there is a high degree of uncertainty around the cost, around the schedule of delivery, and around ultimate operational effectiveness. There really is no way to determine with any degree of certainty what the outcome of those developmental options might be. And I would contrast that with what has been obviously described as the only currently available aircraft that actually meets the requirements as articulated by the Royal Canadian Air Force.
And if I may add to that, the one which is available but also in operation and service, I mean, there's 160 of them flying. And if my memory serves me well, I don't want to, the generals will know that, but I read like 560,000 hours that have been flown. So you're talking about an equipment that obviously has been tested in operation. But let me be very clear. We're going to be supporting Bombardier with everything we have. We believe in them. We believe that they have amazing aircrafts. We've seen a number of sales in a number of jurisdictions. But then sometimes you need to match the aircraft with the capabilities and what you need and the timeline. I think what we heard from Minister Blair and you hear from National Defense was the timeline and the fact that we need, because our aging fleet of Aurora, we need that capability. You know, we're going to have it by 2026, 2027. So that's extremely quick in order to fill a gap. Now, that being said, you know, we're going to be looking with Bombardier at opportunities. I think no one should see in that anything but the fact that we needed an aircraft rapidly that would meet the operational requirement of the national defense through our mission with NATO and NORAD. But we're going to be working, as we work with the entire industry, to make sure that Bombardier and others in the supply chain can succeed, and certainly helping them to open other fields which they're looking at, militarizing a number of aircraft, looking at a number of customers around the world. I can assure you that we've been in contact with them. We like what they do, and we're going to be continuing to support them.
I know the ministers have to leave. There's Sarah Ricci in the room that would like to squeeze in maybe one last question quickly, if it's possible.
Minister Blair, this one is for you, I believe. Given the focus on protecting the Arctic and given the capabilities that this new fleet will provide us in the Arctic, I'm curious why it will not be positioned in the Arctic. You know, Canada has also talked about the need for more infrastructure in the far north. So why aren't we using this as an opportunity to build that out?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. The current fleet of CP-140s is located, as I've already indicated, in Greenwood, Nova Scotia, and Comox, British Columbia. And so that's where they will be based, but they will also have the capability of deploying from a number of other locations located in the Arctic. And so we will have the ability much of their work will be in those areas. We talk about where they'll be based, where the aircraft, where the crews will be resident, and where the aircraft will be maintained, is in the two places I've just mentioned, which is exactly the same two places where we currently service and support the CP-140. But we have the ability, and it will be necessary to make sure that those planes are also able to land and be used in the high Arctic, and we have a number of bases there. I'm aware of the location of 3 of them. If there are other places, I'm sure you'll tell us.
So we have several deployed operating locations, like in Iqaluit, Yellowknife, Goose Bay in Labrador, for example, and missing one as well. Thank you. Inuvik. So we will be able to operate out of there, but the beauty about the P8 Alpha Poseidon is the air-to-air refueling capability. We project air power all over the world right now from our wing and bases in Canada, and we'll certainly do the same for the Arctic. Thank you.
Monsieur McKenna, il y a une journaliste dans la salle qui a demandé si vous pourriez rester pour une petite question de plus. Les ministres
Mr. McKenna, we're asking if you are available for another question. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for your service.
Thank you, sir.
So Ashley, you might be able to...
I had them all landing in the Arctic. I forgot we could refuel them.
That's good.
Another investment we're making.
Sorry. Yes.